The wind howls across the black volcanic plain. Snow drives sideways, burying everything that doesn't move. In Iceland, winter descends like a shroud, blotting out the sun for months. Temperatures plunge below freezing. Storms roll in from the North Atlantic, with gale-force winds that can flatten a standing man. In the 9th century, Norse settlers first arrived on these shores. They faced a problem that would test every ounce of their ingenuity.
How do you build a house when there are no trees?
The Vikings who crossed the ocean from Scandinavia were accustomed to timber halls, long rectangular buildings with vertical wooden walls.
But when they stepped onto the beaches of Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands, they found landscapes almost entirely devoid of forest. Only scattered birch scrub clung to the hillsides. No oak, no pine, just rock, grass, and peat stretching to the horizon.
The question wasn't merely architectural. It was existential. Winter in the North Atlantic doesn't forgive mistakes. A poorly insulated dwelling means frostbite, hypothermia, death. Fuel is scarce, daylight vanishes, the earth itself freezes solid.
Something that would come to define their survival in these harsh lands. They stopped fighting the environment and started building with it. They turned the frozen ground into walls. They roofed their homes with grass. They dug their dwellings into the earth itself, creating structures so deeply integrated with the landscape that from a distance, they looked like grassy hillsides with doors. These were turf houses, longhouses with walls made from blocks of peat and sod, thick enough to trap body heat.
Durable enough to stand for generations. And they worked.
Inside these earth-covered halls, families endured months of darkness and cold, keeping warm with nothing more than a single open fire.
And the insulating power of the surrounding soil. This is the story of how Vikings engineered survival in one of the most unforgiving climates on Earth.
Using the very elements that threatened to kill them. The first challenge was material. In mainland Scandinavia, timber was abundant. A Norse chieftain could fell a dozen oaks and raise a hall in weeks.
But in Iceland, only about 30% of the island supported even minimal birch woodland. And those trees were small.
Nothing like the towering pines of Norway. Archaeological surveys confirm that early settlers faced a timber famine almost immediately.
Good structural wood simply didn't exist. What they did have was turf.
Beneath the thin layer of grass that covered the island lay thick deposits of peat, partially decomposed plant matter, compact and dense.
This peat could be cut into blocks, like bricks, and stacked. The blocks were light enough to carry, but heavy enough to stay put once positioned.
And crucially, peat had a property that wood lacked. It was an extraordinary insulator.
The cellular structure of decomposed plant fibers trapped air in countless tiny pockets, creating a natural barrier against cold.
A wall of turf 1 meter thick could hold heat inside far better than a wooden wall of any thickness.
So the Norse began cutting. They sliced rectangular sods from the hillsides, each block roughly the size of a loaf of bread. Roots still tangled through the grass on top. These turfs were stacked in a herringbone pattern. Each layer angled slightly so that the weight pressed inward rather than outward, preventing collapse. Walls rose slowly, block by block, until they stood 1 to 2 meters thick. From the outside, these walls looked alive.
The grass on top kept growing. Roots knit the blocks together. In summer, wildflowers bloomed on the roof. The house became indistinguishable from the land itself. But turf alone couldn't support a roof. For that, the Norse needed timber. And timber was the most precious resource in their new world.
They couldn't afford to waste it on walls or floors. Every beam had to count. So they turned to the ocean. Arctic currents are a fascinating and powerful phenomenon. Rivers in Siberia carry meltwater north through the taiga forests. And with that water come logs.
Trees felled by storms, eroded banks, and spring floods.
These logs drift into the Arctic Ocean, where they become locked in sea ice. The ice moves slowly, over months or years. It drifts westward across the top of the world, carried by currents that circle the pole. Some of it melts off the coast of Greenland. Some continue south past Iceland. And when it finally breaks apart in warmer waters, the logs it carried are released. To the Norse, this was providence. Driftwood washed up on Icelandic beaches in quantities that varied wildly from year to year.
But when it arrived, it was treated like treasure. Coastal landowners had legal rights to any timber that came ashore on their property.
Men would haul the logs inland, dry them, and split them carefully. A single good beam could frame a doorway.
A handful of posts could support a roof. The wood didn't need to bear the weight of the walls. The turf did that.
It only needed to hold up the roof and provide a skeleton for the structure. Archaeological excavations of early North.
However, as supplies dwindled over time, they adapted. Later generations split logs lengthwise, making two beams from one. They recycled timber from abandoned buildings. They imported small amounts from Norway at great expense.
In a world where most building materials were renewable, you could always cut more turf. Wood stood alone as irreplaceable.
The construction process itself was systematic and labor-intensive. First, builders chose a site, often on a slope to aid drainage.
They leveled the ground and laid a foundation course of flat stones. These stones served two purposes.
They prevented the turf walls from sitting directly on damp soil, which would cause rot, and they provided a stable base that could bear the immense weight of the earthen structure.
In Greenland, even churches used this method. Stone footings topped with turf walls that could be over 1.5 meters thick. Once the foundation was in place, the wooden frame went up. Vertical posts were sunk into the ground or set on stone pads. Crossbeams connected them. A ridgepole ran the length of the building, creating the spine of the roof. This frame was minimal,
just enough to hold the structure's shape. Then the turf work began. Builders stacked sod blocks around the frame,
rafters of driftwood were laid across the ridgepole, and over these went more turf, layer after layer, until the entire structure was covered. From above, the house looked like a long green mound with a door at one end. Snow would pile on top in winter, adding another layer of insulation.
It's a reminder, carved into 1,000 grassy hillsides across the North Atlantic, that human ingenuity